Introduction: Why money feels different to different people. Picture this: you are sitting in your favorite local coffee shop. The steam from a fresh flat white curls lazily into the afternoon air. Across the table sits someone who looks completely at ease. They aren't wealthy in the lottery winner sense, yet they navigate life with an unshakable, quiet confidence. Meanwhile, you might be carrying a mental spreadsheet of every pending bill, every overdue invoice, and every unexpected expense that could derail your month. Have you ever noticed that some people seem to attract opportunities while others spend years chasing them, running on a financial treadmill that never quite slows down? Here is the question that changes everything. Why do two people with the exact same salary, the exact same college degree, and the exact same zip code end up living completely different financial lives? For years, we have been told that money is a math problem. We are handed spreadsheets, budgeting apps, and lectures on compound interest. We are told to cut out our morning lattes, stop buying avocado toast, and pinch every penny until the eagle screams. And yet, millions of people follow every rule in the financial playbook, balance their accounts down to the last cent, and still feel a suffocating knot in their stomachs whenever they check their bank balance. Nothing says, "I am in control of my financial destiny," quite like opening your banking app with one eye closed, holding your breath, and praying you won't hear that digital cash register sound of doom. We have all met someone who will spend 3 hours driving across town to save $1.50 on fuel, only to turn around and impulse buy a high-tech gadget they saw on an Instagram ad 3 minutes before falling asleep. We laugh because we see ourselves in it. We have all treated our bank accounts like a horror movie at some point in our lives. This audiobook explores a shocking reality: scarcity is not simply a financial condition. It is a way of seeing the world. Money does not simply respond to effort. It responds to perception. It responds to decisions. It responds to identity. When you operate from a mindset of scarcity, your brain undergoes a biological shift. Behavioral economists and neuroscientists have discovered that chronic financial stress literally narrows your cognitive bandwidth. It hijacks your executive functioning, forcing your mind into tunnel vision. You become so consumed by the immediate crisis of today that your brain literally edits out the long-term opportunities of tomorrow. It is like trying to appreciate the grand architecture of a cathedral while someone is shining a laser pointer directly into your eye. Throughout this journey, we are going to explore how scarcity quietly shapes your attention, your relationships, your career choices, your creativity, your generosity, your confidence, and your willingness to take calculated risks. More importantly, we are going to explore how it dictates the exact amount of money you secretly allow yourself to receive. You see, many of us suffer from an invisible internal ceiling. We say we want abundance, but the moment a large sum of money lands in our hands, an invisible alarm bell rings in our chest. We feel an immediate urge to get rid of it, sabotage it, or worry ourselves sick that it will vanish overnight. We have become so accustomed to the familiar friction of survival that ease feels suspicious. We are going to dismantle that friction piece by piece. This is not about positive thinking, vision boards covered in sports cars, or pretending that bills don't exist. That is magical thinking, and reality has a stubborn way of breaking through it. True abundance is an inner transformation. It is the steady, grounded realization that wealth is not a finite pie where someone else's slice leaves you with crumbs. Wealth is an expanding ecosystem of value, creativity, and human exchange. As we move through these 15 chapters, you will discover how shifting from survival thinking to abundance thinking changes not just your bank account, but every single area of your life. Your relationships will deepen because you will stop viewing partners and colleagues as threats to your security. Your career will expand because you will stop negotiating from a place of desperate compliance. Your peace of mind will finally return. Imagine waking up on a Tuesday morning and realizing that money is no longer the invisible narrator of your daily anxiety. Imagine making financial decisions from a place of clarity, curiosity, and calm, rather than fear, panic, and old inherited shame. That is not a fantasy. That is what happens when money flows differently because you have stopped thinking from scarcity. Let us take a deep breath, leave the frantic rushing at the door. Chapter 1: Scarcity is more than a lack of money. Have you ever stood in the grocery store aisle, holding two identical brands of olive oil, staring at the price tags for 5 full minutes as if you were deciphering ancient hieroglyphics, trying to justify a 30-cent difference. We have all been there. Nothing quite captures the human comedy of modern survival like agonizing over 30 cents on cooking oil while simultaneously paying a monthly subscription for a streaming service we haven't opened since the previous presidential election. Or consider the classic financial paradox. The person who refuses to invest $50 in a book or a skill that could double their earning power because it feels too risky, yet happily drops hundreds of dollars on a weekend getaway to escape the crushing anxiety of their daily routine. We laugh because it is painfully human. But beneath the humor lies a profound truth about how our minds interact with the material world. Most of us spend our entire lives treating scarcity as a math problem. We believe that if we just had more numbers in our bank account, the anxiety would vanish. We assume that poverty of the wallet is the root cause of all our financial distress. Yet, neuroscience and behavioral psychology reveal a much stranger reality. Scarcity is not merely a reflection of your bank balance, it is a cognitive state. It is an operating system that runs quietly in the background of your mind, shaping how you perceive time, value, risk, and possibility. Think about how scarcity alters your perception of time. When you operate from deep financial panic, the future essentially stops existing. Long-term planning becomes an impossible luxury. If you are worried about how you are going to pay rent next week, your brain refuses to look 3 years down the road. Why? Because from an evolutionary standpoint, your brain is doing its job. It is locking you into immediate survival mode. A tiger is at the cave entrance. You don't care about interior decorating. The trouble is, modern financial survival rarely involves tigers. It involves invoices, credit card statements, and market fluctuations. When your brain treats a late utility bill with the same biological alarm system it would use for a predator attack, your higher-level thinking shuts down. Your cognitive bandwidth narrows. This narrow bandwidth leads to what behavioral economists call the scarcity trap. Because your mind is entirely consumed by immediate deficits, you miss the broader horizon. You make short-term, expensive choices simply because they offer immediate relief. You take out high-interest payday loans, you ignore minor car troubles until they become catastrophic engine failures, or you stay in a soul-crushing job because the sheer terror of interviewing elsewhere feels like climbing Mount Everest in flip-flops. Consider the story of a talented graphic designer named Marcus. Marcus was exceptionally skilled, yet he constantly found himself down to his last few dollars at the end of every month. Whenever a prospective client asked for his rates, Marcus would immediately quote the lowest possible price, terrified that if he asked for what he was actually worth, the client would vanish. He was operating from a place of chronic scarcity. One day, Marcus decided to test an experiment. He forced himself to pause before quoting his next client. Instead of blurting out a desperate discount, he took a deep breath, looked at the actual scope of the project, and quoted a fair, professional rate that reflected his years of experience. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was certain the client would laugh and walk away. Instead, the client paused, nodded, and said, "Great. When can you start?" Marcus discovered something staggering: the client didn't value him less because he charged more. If anything, the higher rate signaled confidence, professionalism, and self-respect. The barrier wasn't the market. The barrier was Marcus's internal fear whispering that he was lucky to get any scraps at all. When you believe deep down that resources are strictly limited and that you are always at the bottom of the pile, your behavior changes. You become hypervigilant. You hoard small things while bleeding large opportunities. You view colleagues not as collaborators, but as competitors trying to steal your portion of a shrinking pie. But what happens when you begin to loosen the grip of that internal panic? When you realize that scarcity is a conditioned response rather than an absolute law of nature, the world begins to look different. You stop seeing every transaction as a zero-sum game where one person wins and the other loses. You start recognizing that value is created, expanded, and shared. Shifting away from scarcity doesn't mean ignoring reality or spending recklessly. It means recognizing when fear is driving the car. It means catching yourself when you are making choices out of panic rather than strategy. As we move forward, we are going to look closely at where these deeply ingrained survival scripts came from in the first place, because nobody is born terrified of money. We learned it somewhere. And what has been learned can be unlearned. Chapter Summary. Scarcity is fundamentally a cognitive state and an operating system rather than just a lack of money. Chronic financial stress narrows cognitive bandwidth, forcing the brain into immediate survival mode and blocking long-term planning. The scarcity trap causes people to make expensive short-term choices for immediate relief, reinforcing the cycle. Operating from scarcity leads to undercharging, overvigilance, and viewing colleagues as competitors in a zero-sum game. Recognizing when fear is driving financial decisions is the first critical step toward Chapter 2, The Hidden Stories You Learned About Wealth. Have you ever noticed how easily you can spot someone else's financial bad habits while remaining entirely blind to your own? We have all met someone who lectures their friends on the evils of consumerism while sitting on a couch they financed with a 4-year personal loan, or someone who proudly proclaims, "Money isn't everything," right before spending 3 days stressing over a minor medical bill. We chuckle at the contradiction because human beings are walking paradoxes. We want financial peace, yet we cling tightly to the very beliefs that keep us at war with our wallets. Where do these beliefs come from? Nobody is born with a financial narrative. A baby doesn't come out of the delivery room worried about inflation rates or credit scores. Yet, by the time we reach adulthood, our minds are cluttered with invisible scripts about wealth, worth, and survival that we absorbed long before we even knew what a bank account was. Think about the casual phrases echoed around family dinner tables when you were growing up. Money doesn't grow on trees. Rich people only get that way by cheating. Who do we think we are, royalty? We have to work twice as hard just to get half as far. These statements sound innocent enough when spoken by tired parents trying to manage household budgets. But to a child's developing brain, they operate like software code installed on a hard drive. They plant a deep, subconscious association: wealth equals struggle, money is hard to get, and wanting more makes you greedy or selfish. Behavioral psychologists refer to this as the formation of our core financial schema. Long before we make our first investment or earn our first paycheck, our emotional relationship with money has already been scripted. Consider the story of a brilliant corporate manager named Julian. Julian was exceptionally good at his job, yet whenever a promotion came up that included a substantial pay raise, Julian would mysteriously sabotage his chances. He would miss deadlines, downplay his achievements in interviews, or convince himself he wasn't ready. When Julian finally sat down with a coach to untangle his behavior, a childhood memory surfaced. Growing up, his parents had struggled through a bitter legal battle with a wealthy relative over an inheritance. In Julian's young mind, wealth was permanently tethered to betrayal, family conflict, and pain. His subconscious had quietly adopted a protective mechanism: if I stay modest and broke, nobody will fight with me. Poverty is safe. He was protecting himself from an invisible ghost of the past, using his current bank account as a shield. Then there is the opposite narrative: the person who spends every cent the moment it lands in their hands, driven by an unconscious belief that money is slippery and untrustworthy. If you don't spend it immediately on a treat, life will take it away from you anyway. Nothing says, "I don't trust tomorrow," quite like buying designer shoes on a credit card while your savings account is sitting at zero, convincing yourself that you deserve a reward for surviving another miserable week at a job you despise. We laugh because we have all done our own version of retail therapy, using a quick dopamine hit from a shopping bag to bandage an emotional wound. But emotional spending is rarely about the item itself. It is a desperate bid for control. When your life feels chaotic, out of control, or stagnant, clicking "buy now" gives you a 3-second rush of absolute power. You are the master of your universe, until the credit card statement arrives 30 days later to pop the bubble. Unlearning these hidden stories requires a profound act of emotional archaeology. You have to dig down into the basement of your beliefs and ask yourself, is this rule actually true, or am I just repeating something I heard when I was 10 years old? When you uncover a belief like, making a lot of money requires sacrificing your soul, you have to shine a light on it. You have to realize that wealth is a neutral tool. A hammer can be used to bludgeon someone, or it can be used to build a home for a family. Money works the exact same way. In the hands of a person anchored in abundance, generosity, and wisdom, money becomes an engine for creativity, security, and positive change. As we strip away these inherited scripts, your relationship with money begins to transform from an emotional battlefield into a clear canvas. You stop reacting to ghosts from your childhood and start making deliberate, grounded choices about your financial future. Chapter Summary. Core financial beliefs are unconsciously absorbed during childhood from family remarks and environment. Subconscious scripts often tether wealth to pain, conflict, or guilt, creating self-sabotaging behaviors in adulthood. Emotional spending and retail therapy are frequently unconscious attempts to gain a quick sense of control over emotional chaos. Money is a neutral tool, its impact depends entirely on the character, mindset, and Chapter 3, How Your Brain Quietly Creates Financial Reality. Have you ever noticed how the moment you decide to buy a specific car or a particular model of shoes, suddenly you see them everywhere? They are at every stoplight, parked in every driveway, and glaring at you from billboards. Did the entire city suddenly rush out and purchase your exact taste in vehicles overnight? Of course not. Those cars were already there. Your brain simply decided they mattered, and your reticular activating system, the biological filter sitting at the base of your brain stem, flipped the switch from background noise to high-definition awareness. Now, apply that exact same neurological mechanism to your financial life. If your brain is tuned to the frequency of scarcity, it acts like a relentless radar system scanning exclusively for threat, lack, and limitation. It filters out solutions, ignores lateral career moves, and stays utterly blind to creative financial opportunities because it is too busy hunting for impending disaster. Neuroscientists tell us that our brains are prediction machines. They do not merely record reality, they construct it based on our deeply held beliefs and expectations. If you walk through life whispering to yourself, "I never catch a break," your brain dutifully accepts that premise as an objective instruction. It then scours your daily experiences for evidence to prove you right, while quietly editing out any contradictory data. Consider the story of a mild-mannered accountant named Daniel. Daniel spent years convinced that financial security only came from absolute compliance, working 60-hour weeks at a mid-tier firm, and never rocking the boat. Whenever someone mentioned freelancing, starting a side venture, or investing in stocks, Daniel's brain immediately generated a reel of catastrophic worst-case scenarios: market crashes, lawsuits, bankruptcy, and public humiliation. To Daniel, caution felt like wisdom. But behavioral psychology reveals a different angle: his caution was actually disguised terror. His brain had mapped safety so narrowly that anything outside his rigid comfort zone looked like a cliff edge. One day, due to corporate downsizing, Daniel's predictable world collapsed. The firm downsized, and Daniel found himself out of a job. Panic threatened to swallow him whole. Yet, forced out of his routine, he reluctantly took a freelance bookkeeping gig for a local tech startup. Within 3 months, because the startup loved his precision, they offered him contract work that paid twice his former monthly salary for half the hours. Daniel sat at his kitchen table staring at the invoice, laughing out loud at the absurdity of it. For a decade, his brain had convinced him that abundance was dangerous and scarce, while the actual risk had been staying chained to a desk out of fear of the unknown. Nothing illustrates the comedy of our mental blind spots quite like how we handle windfalls. Have you ever noticed what happens when someone deep in scarcity thinking receives unexpected money, like a tax refund or a surprise bonus? Instead of pausing to strategize or invest, an invisible panic button goes off. It is like holding a hot potato. The brain screams, "Quick, get rid of it before it vanishes or someone takes it away." Within 48 hours, the money is gone, swallowed up by impulsive purchases or frivolous treats, and the person sighs with a strange sense of relief, returning to their familiar, comfortable baseline of zero. We laugh, but it is a tragedy wrapped in a comedy mask. Our brains are biologically wired for familiarity over happiness. If your nervous system is calibrated to survive on financial high alert, peace feels deeply uncomfortable. It feels suspicious. Your brain actually generates anxiety when things are going well because it is waiting for the other shoe to drop. Breaking this cycle requires retraining your brain's perceptual filter. You cannot change your financial reality by fighting your external circumstances while your internal radar is still locked on survival mode. You have to consciously reprogram what your brain looks for. When a financial challenge arises, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me and how can I survive it?" abundance thinking teaches you to ask a radically different question: what is this situation teaching me, and what hidden leverage point am I currently refusing to see? That single shift in inquiry reroutes your neural pathways. It turns off the primitive alarm bells in your amygdala and hands the steering wheel back to your prefrontal cortex, where strategy, creativity, and calm decision-making live. As your brain learns to scan for solutions rather than threats, the entire landscape of your financial reality begins to shift. You stop stumbling through a fog of anxiety and start navigating with a clear, steady compass. Chapter Summary. The brain's reticular activating system filters reality based on internal beliefs, highlighting threats or opportunities depending on your mindset. Scarcity thinking programs the brain to hunt exclusively for lack and danger, editing out long-term solutions and creative avenues. Fear often masquerades as caution, keeping people trapped in stagnant situations under the illusion of safety. Unexpected windfalls are often unconsciously sabotaged by the brain because financial ease feels unfamiliar and threatening to a nervous system calibrated for survival. Shifting your mental inquiry from survival panic to curious problem-solving activates. Chapter 4, Fear is the most expensive thing you own. Have you ever watched someone spend 3 hours driving across town to save $4 on a tank of gas, only to turn around and buy an extended warranty on a toaster? We have to laugh at ourselves, because nothing captures our human contradictions quite like our relationship with financial fear. We obsess over tiny expenses while accidentally bleeding thousands of dollars through sheer, paralyzed inaction. We treat a $50 investment in our personal growth like it's a gamble at a sketchy underground casino, yet we let thousands of dollars sit in a traditional bank account earning 0.01% interest because moving it feels safe. We call that being careful. Psychology calls it something entirely different: expensive terror. Fear is arguably the most costly line item in any financial budget, yet it never shows up on a balance sheet. It doesn't appear as a line item labeled anxiety tax, but make no mistake, you are paying it every single day. Think about how fear operates in the marketplace. When you are paralyzed by the fear of losing money, you stop taking calculated risks. You avoid negotiating your salary because you are terrified of hearing the word no. You refuse to launch that side business because what if your friends think it's silly? You stay in a stagnant career path because the devil you know feels infinitely safer than the angels you don't. That fear feels noble. It whispers in your ear, "I am just being practical. I am protecting my family. I am being responsible." But beneath the polite veneer of practicality lies a quiet, corrosive panic. Consider the story of a meticulous administrator named Leonard. Leonard was a master of budgeting. He tracked every penny, clipped coupons with surgical precision, and kept his expenses lean. Yet, for 15 years, Leonard's salary remained virtually unchanged. Why? Because whenever his annual performance review rolled around, his throat would tighten. The thought of asking his boss for a raise triggered a somatic panic response. His heart raced, his palms sweated, and his brain conjured vivid fantasies of being fired on the spot for sheer audacity. To soothe his anxiety, Leonard would double down on coupon clipping. He would spend hours organizing grocery discounts to save $20 a week, while leaving thousands of dollars on the table by refusing to advocate for his true market value. He was tripping over dollars to pick up pennies, all because his nervous system equated professional self-advocacy with mortal danger. One day, pushed to his absolute breaking point by mounting inflation and sheer exhaustion, Leonard decided to run an experiment. He stopped looking at his grocery receipts and instead spent 2 hours preparing a concise, objective presentation of his contributions to the company over the past 3 years. When he walked into his manager's office, his voice shook. But he said the words, "Based on my increased responsibilities and current market rates, I am requesting a salary review." His manager didn't blink. He didn't call security. He simply nodded, reviewed the document, and approved a substantial salary increase 2 weeks later. Leonard walked out of that office feeling like he had just climbed Everest. The irony hit him like a cold wave. The danger had entirely lived inside his own head. The fear he had nursed for a decade had cost him tens of thousands of dollars in unrealized income. When you operate from a scarcity mindset, fear becomes your financial advisor. And let me tell you, fear is a terrible financial advisor. Fear's only strategy is contraction. When fear is in charge, you shrink your life, you lower your expectations, you settle for less, and you convince yourself that playing small is a virtue. Think about why people buy expensive financial courses or get rich-quick masterclasses they never actually finish. It looks like aspiration, but often, it is just fear wearing a costume. It's a panicked attempt to find a magic bullet because the idea of steady, patient, self-directed growth feels too slow and uncertain. Or consider the person who says, "Money isn't everything," with a tight, strained smile, while lying awake at night watching the ceiling fan spin, calculating how they are going to stretch their paycheck across 5 weeks. That phrase is rarely an expression of spiritual enlightenment, it is usually an emotional defense mechanism. It is a way of dismissing what you don't feel capable of acquiring, soothing your ego by pretending you didn't really want it anyway. True financial courage is not the absence of fear. It is the ability to recognize when fear is trying to make your decisions for you, and gently pushing it back into the passenger seat. When you shift from survival thinking to abundance thinking, your relationship with risk undergoes a total revolution. You stop seeing every minor setback as a catastrophe and start seeing it as data. You stop treating uncertainty as an enemy and start recognizing it as the natural playground of opportunity. You realize that the greatest financial risk you can ever take is refusing to grow. Chapter Summary. Fear frequently masquerades as being practical, causing people to obsess over minor expenses while ignoring major financial opportunities. Operating from fear leads to self-sabotaging behaviors, such as refusing to negotiate salaries or avoiding necessary career risks. Financial anxiety often triggers avoidance tactics, like extreme coupon clipping or buying unread courses as a false sense of control. Dismissive mantras like, "money isn't everything," are sometimes emotional defense mechanisms used to mask deep-seated financial intimidation. Shifting to an abundance mindset transforms uncertainty from a terrifying threat. Chapter 5, Why Survival Thinking Keeps You Stuck. Have you ever watched someone play a video game on the absolute hardest difficulty setting, refusing to use any power-ups, constantly complaining about how unfair the game is, yet stubbornly refusing to change their strategy? We laugh because it sounds absurd. Yet, many of us run our financial lives the exact same way. We trap ourselves on a grueling, high-difficulty survival loop, working twice as hard for half the reward, while wondering why we never seem to reach the next level. Survival thinking is an addictive trap. To understand why, we have to look past simple economics and into human biology. When you spend years navigating chronic financial stress, your nervous system adapts to the chaos. Cortisol and adrenaline become your familiar chemical companions. You learn how to juggle bills like a circus performer, robbing Peter to pay Paul, dodging collection calls, and pulling off financial miracles just before the deadline. There is a bizarre, twisted comfort in that cycle. It keeps you perpetually busy. You are always fighting fires, which means you never have to face the terrifying vulnerability of actually building something sustainable. Consider the story of a talented freelance caterer named Fiona. Fiona was a culinary artist who could transform simple ingredients into a feast fit for royalty. Yet, her business was constantly teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Why? Because Fiona spent 80% of her time hunting for cheap ingredients, haggling with suppliers over pennies, and stressing out over last-minute cancellations, while completely ignoring marketing, client retention, and raising her prices. Whenever a friend suggested she hire an assistant or redesign her pricing structure to reflect her true talent, Fiona would tense up and say, "You don't understand. I can't afford to slow down. I have to hustle." She wore her exhaustion like a badge of honor. To Fiona, busyness equaled productivity, and struggle equaled hard work. She was addicted to the adrenaline rush of the survival loop. Deep down, she believed that if she wasn't constantly suffering, she wasn't truly earning her living. One week, forced into bed by a severe case of flu, Fiona had no choice but to stop. For 3 days, she couldn't answer emails, haggle with suppliers, or run herself ragged. Terrified that her business would collapse, she braced for total ruin. Instead, something miraculous happened. During those 3 days of enforced stillness, with her frantic nervous system finally offline, her mind cleared. She realized that she had been spending 90% of her energy on low-value clients who drained her profits, while ignoring the high-end corporate accounts that were right under her nose. When she recovered, she didn't return to the frantic hustle. She raised her prices by 40%, dropped her high-maintenance clients, and focused exclusively on boutique events. Her workload dropped by half, but her income doubled. Fiona learned the hard way what behavioral psychologists and wealth strategists know to be true: survival thinking keeps you trapped because it substitutes motion for progress. Nothing illustrates this better than the classic corporate trap: winning a substantial salary increase, only to feel just as broke 6 months later. You know the drill. You finally get that long-awaited promotion. You celebrate by upgrading your apartment, financing a slightly nicer car, and dining out at trendier restaurants. Your income goes up, your lifestyle expands instantly to swallow every extra dollar, and your stress levels remain completely unchanged. We call it lifestyle inflation, but it is really lifestyle anxiety. It is an unconscious attempt to prove to ourselves and the world that we have finally made it, using material symbols to bandage an internal sense of inadequacy. Survival thinking convinces you that you must constantly prove your worth through struggle. It tells you that if things are easy, you must be doing something wrong. It makes you suspicious of passive income, automated savings, and smart delegation because you believe that real money can only be wrung out of blood, sweat, and tears. Breaking out of the survival loop requires a radical mental detox. It requires letting go of the badge of martyrdom. You do not get extra spiritual or financial points for making your life harder than it needs to be. When you shift from survival to abundance, you stop treating your business or your career as a grueling test of endurance. You start treating it as an engine of value creation. You learn to trade frantic hustle for strategic leverage. You realize that working smarter isn't lazy, it is the ultimate expression of self-respect. As the fog of survival thinking clears, you stop reacting to daily emergencies and start designing a life of genuine prosperity. Chapter Summary. Chronic financial stress conditions the nervous system to crave chaos, making the familiar, survival loop, feel strangely comfortable. Busyness and exhaustion are often mistaken for productivity, masking a deep fear of strategic planning and growth. Lifestyle inflation is frequently driven by an unconscious desire to prove self-worth through material upgrades rather than true wealth building. Survival thinking falsely teaches that money can only be earned through suffering, leading people to resist leverage and smart delegation. Shifting from frantic hustle to strategic leverage is essential for breaking the survival loop and achieving. Chapter 6, The Identity That Attracts Prosperity. Have you ever watched someone win a modest lottery or receive an unexpected financial windfall, only to find themselves right back where they started, or worse, just a few short years later? We shake our heads and wonder how anyone could squander such a golden opportunity. We assume they simply lacked basic math skills or a decent budgeting app. But financial experts and psychologists know a more sobering truth. Money without a transformed identity is like water poured into a basket. No matter how much you pour in, it will eventually leak out because the container itself is broken. Money does not flow to what you want. It flows to who you are. Your external financial reality is nothing more than a physical printout of your internal identity. If your deep, foundational belief is that you are someone who always struggles, someone who is perpetually on the financial precipice, or someone who is inherently bad with numbers, your subconscious will work tirelessly to protect that identity. Even if you manage to acquire money through sheer effort or luck, your internal thermostat will kick on, triggering self-sabotage until your bank balance matches your self-image. Consider the story of a talented freelance photographer named Maya. Maya was an artistic genius behind the lens, yet her bank account was a chronic disaster zone. Whenever she landed a high-paying commercial gig, an invisible alarm bell would ring inside her. Within days of receiving payment, her car would suddenly break down, an unexpected tax bill would land in her mailbox, or she would feel an overwhelming, compulsive urge to treat all her friends to expensive dinners to prove she was doing well. Maya's bank account was simply mirroring her deep, hidden conviction: people like me don't get to stay comfortable. Trouble is always around the corner. She didn't see herself as a wealthy, stable professional, she saw herself as a struggling artist just one step away from disaster. And her life dutifully complied with that script. Nothing illustrates this identity gap quite like the comedy of upgrading our environments without upgrading our internal wiring. Have you ever met someone who moves into a luxury apartment complex, drives a sleek new car, and wears designer labels, yet spends the entire month sweating over whether their debit card will decline at the grocery store checkouts? We laugh because we recognize the performance. It is the external costume of wealth worn by an internal character who is still terrified of poverty. Shifting from survival to abundance requires a fundamental identity evolution. You cannot simply budget your way into a new tax bracket while holding on to the psychology of a survivor. You have to ask yourself a radical question: how does a financially secure, abundant person view this situation? How do they make decisions? How do they handle uncertainty? When an abundant identity takes root, your entire posture toward money changes. You stop acting like a victim of the economy, your employer, or your past mistakes. You start stepping into the role of an architect. Think about how an architect approaches a building project. They don't panic when they encounter a design flaw or a delayed shipment of materials. They don't throw their hands in the air and declare that the entire building is cursed. They simply look at the blueprint, adjust their strategy, and keep building. When you shift your identity from a reactive survivor to a proactive creator, financial setbacks stop feeling like personal indictments. A delayed invoice or a bad investment isn't proof that you are doomed to fail, it is simply valuable data. It is feedback from the marketplace helping you refine your approach. Furthermore, an abundant identity changes how you handle wealth when it actually arrives. Instead of the frantic hot potato syndrome where you rush to get rid of money because it feels unsafe, an abundant identity greets money with calm gratitude and strategic intention. You learn to pause. You ask yourself, does this purchase, investment, or decision align with the long-term vision of who I am becoming? You stop spending money you haven't earned to buy things you don't need to impress people you don't even like. That classic cliché isn't just a witty saying, it is the ultimate diagnostic tool for a misaligned identity. Stepping into this new identity can feel uncomfortable at first. Your nervous system, so accustomed to the familiar friction of struggle, might try to pull you backward. It will whisper familiar doubts: who do you think you are? You're getting ahead of yourself. That is the exact moment you smile, recognize the old survival operating system trying to reboot, and gently remind yourself, I am no longer running that program. As your new identity solidifies, the external numbers in your life begin to shift naturally, effortlessly, and permanently, because they are finally anchored to a solid foundation. Chapter Summary. External financial reality is a physical printout of internal identity. Money always matches your self-image. Without an internal identity shift, financial windfalls and high earnings are quickly eroded by subconscious self-sabotage. Upgrading external status symbols while keeping a scarcity mindset creates profound financial anxiety and superficial stability. Shifting from a reactive survivor to a proactive architect transforms financial setbacks from personal failures into valuable data. An abundant identity allows you to receive, manage, and deploy money with Chapter 7, How Abundance Changes Everyday Decisions. Have you ever watched someone spend 20 minutes debating over a $4 salad dressing at the grocery store, carefully reading every calorie count and ingredient list, only to drive home and completely forget about the subscription box service they signed up for 6 months ago that has been quietly charging their credit card $50 every single month? We have to laugh at our own blind spots, because human beings are absolute masterclass champions at sweating the microscopic details while missing the massive leaks in our financial roof. We pinch pennies with surgical precision, yet we bleed dollars through automated negligence, all because our brains are exhausted by the daily grind of decision-making. When you operate from a scarcity mindset, every single purchase feels like a high-stakes courtroom trial. Should I buy the organic apples or the conventional ones? Can I afford to grab a coffee with a colleague, or will that throw off my entire weekly ledger? Should I fix the squeaky hinge on the car door now, or wait until it snaps off entirely and costs 5 times as much? This constant micro-decision-making creates what behavioral psychologists call decision fatigue. By the time the afternoon rolls around, your brain's prefrontal cortex is completely fried from chronic cost-benefit calculations. That is precisely why you end up impulse buying takeout you didn't plan for or clicking, buy now, on an online cart full of items you don't actually need. Your brain is simply exhausted from starving itself of ease. Consider the story of a meticulous office administrator named Juliana. Juliana was a budgeting ninja. She tracked every single cent in color-coded spreadsheets, spent her weekends scouring digital coupon sites, and prided herself on never paying full price for anything. Yet, despite her heroic efforts, Juliana felt like she was constantly drowning in financial anxiety. Why? Because her entire financial life was built on defense. Every decision was defensive, reactive, and driven by the underlying fear of running out. One day, Juliana attended a professional development workshop where the speaker challenged the room with a simple question: are you managing your money to build a life, or are you managing your money just to manage your anxiety? That question hit Juliana like a splash of cold water. She realized that she was spending so much mental energy optimizing her pennies that she had zero cognitive bandwidth left to think about her income. She was so terrified of spending $5 unnecessarily that she hadn't asked for a pay raise in 4 years, and she hadn't invested a single dollar toward her future. The next week, Juliana decided to run an experiment. Instead of spending her Saturday morning clipping coupons and stressing over grocery flyers, she used that exact same 2 hours to draft a proposal for a new administrative workflow at her company, one that saved her department hours of manual labor. When she presented it to her director, management was so impressed they created a new supervisory role for her, complete with a salary bump that dwarfed any savings she could ever achieve through coupon clipping. Juliana laughed out loud when she realized the cosmic joke. She had been trying to budget her way to freedom while ignoring the fact that her biggest financial leverage was her own earning power and strategic focus. When you shift from survival thinking to abundance thinking, the nature of your everyday decisions undergoes a profound metamorphosis. You stop making choices out of fear of loss and start making choices out of alignment with your goals. Think about how an abundant mind evaluates a purchase. A scarcity mindset asks, how cheap can I get this, and how much will it hurt to pay for it? An abundance mindset asks, what kind of value does this bring to my life, does it align with my priorities, and is this a wise deployment of my resources? It is the difference between pinching pennies out of panic and investing capital with intention. An abundant mindset also changes how you treat other people during financial exchanges. When you are rooted in scarcity, every transaction feels like a zero-sum game. If the plumber charges you a high hourly rate, you feel cheated, as if they are taking food right out of your mouth. But when you operate from abundance, you recognize that paying fair, or even generous, prices for exceptional work is an investment in a thriving ecosystem of skilled people. You want the people who serve you to prosper, because prosperity is not a limited resource meant to be hoarded, it is an energy meant to circulate. Even your daily spending habits become calmer, clearer, and infinitely more satisfying. You stop buying things to fill an emotional void or to prove your status to people who aren't even paying attention. You buy things that genuinely enhance your well-being, your peace of mind, and your creative output. You realize that every financial decision you make is a vote for the kind of life you are building. When you stop deciding from a place of panic, your choices become cleaner, your regrets disappear, and your money starts working for you instead of keeping you awake at night. Chapter Summary. Scarcity-driven micro-decisions lead to decision fatigue, depleting mental energy and often resulting in impulsive, expensive burnout purchases. Obsessing over minor defensive savings, like extreme couponing, often distracts from high-leverage growth actions like increasing income or career advancement. Shifting from a scarcity question, how cheap is this, to an abundance question, does this align with my priorities, revolutionizes everyday choices. Abundant thinking transforms financial transactions from zero-sum conflicts into mutual exchanges that support a thriving community. Conscious, non-panic decision-making turns everyday spending into intent. Chapter 8, Breaking the Invisible Cycle of Financial Stress. Have you ever watched someone check their bank account balance with the exact same cautious hesitation you might use to open a mysterious package delivered to your doorstep after midnight? We have all been there. Nothing captures the quiet comedy of modern anxiety quite like the ritual avoidance of financial reality. We've all played that classic psychological game where we convince ourselves that if we don't open our banking app for 3 days, the bills will magically resolve themselves, and our credit card balances will feel so neglected they'll just apologize and erase themselves. We laugh because we recognize the absurdity. Yet, financial stress is no laughing matter when it sinks its claws into our daily lives. It is a relentless, low-grade hum of background static that colors every single thing we do. It makes us snappier with our families, distracted at our jobs, and physically exhausted before we even get out of bed in the morning. We tend to treat financial stress as an external math problem. We assume that if we could just earn another $500 or $5,000 a month, the stress would evaporate. But behavioral psychologists and medical researchers have discovered something startling. Financial stress is not strictly about the absolute size of your bank account. It is about the perceived gap between your demands and your perceived capacity to handle them. Consider the high-earning corporate executive who makes $250,000 a year yet suffers from crushing, ulcer-inducing financial panic because their lifestyle has expanded to consume every penny, leaving them perpetually one missed bonus away from total collapse. Compare that to the steady artisan who earns a modest income but lives with calm clarity, zero debt, and a deep sense of resourcefulness. Who is truly wealthy? The person drowning in gold or the person breathing easy in a modest room? Scarcity thinking traps you inside an invisible cycle of stress by convincing you that your security is entirely dependent on external circumstances you cannot control. It tells you that the economy, your boss, the stock market, and your luck are holding you hostage, and that one wrong move will send you spiraling into ruin. Consider the story of a talented freelance copywriter named Toby. Toby was exceptionally gifted at his craft, but his life was governed by chronic financial hypervigilance. Whenever a client delayed an invoice by 24 hours, Toby's body would flood with cortisol. He wouldn't sleep. He would pace his apartment at 3 a.m., firing off passive-aggressive emails and drafting mental scenarios of himself living on a park bench. His physical health began to fray. His creativity dried up because his brain was too busy fighting phantom tigers to write a decent headline. One afternoon, completely burned out, Toby sat down with a holistic financial coach who asked him a disarming question: how much of the danger you are fighting right now is actually happening today, and how much of it is a movie playing in your head about next year? Toby paused. He looked at his actual bank account, his current contracts, and his immediate reserves. The truth hit him like a physical blow. Today, he had food in the fridge, his rent was paid, and he had 3 active projects underway. The catastrophe he was screaming about in his mind was entirely a projection of his fears. Toby decided to run a radical experiment. He implemented what he called the stress boundary. Whenever a financial worry popped into his head outside of his designated weekly financial review hour, he physically wrote it down on a notepad, closed the book, and said aloud, "Noted. We will look at this on Friday." At first, his anxious brain fought back furiously, demanding attention like an overtired toddler. But within 2 weeks, something incredible happened. His nervous system began to unlearn the panic loop. Because he stopped feeding the emergency response with constant anxious rumination, his mind cleared up. His writing improved, his clients noticed the renewed quality of his work, and ironically, his income increased because he was operating from calm authority rather than jittery desperation. Breaking the cycle of financial stress does not require you to pretend that challenges don't exist. It requires you to stop manufacturing secondary emergencies on top of the real ones. When you shift from survival thinking to abundance thinking, you learn to separate actual financial problems from emotional panic. An actual problem requires a practical, step-by-step strategy: call the provider, adjust the budget, increase the invoice. Emotional panic, on the other hand, demands that you suffer multiple times over for something that hasn't even happened yet. You realize that your peace of mind is not a luxury prize you unlock only after you hit $1 million net worth. Peace of mind is the foundation upon which all genuine wealth is built. When you stop letting stress drive your decision-making, you reclaim your cognitive bandwidth, your health, and your clarity. And from that place of inner calm, you become practically unstoppable. Chapter Summary. Financial stress is driven more by the perceived gap between demands and capacity than by the absolute size of a bank account. Chronic financial panic triggers a continuous loop of cortisol and anxiety, impairing both health and professional creativity. Separating actual, solvable financial problems from catastrophic mental projections is essential for calming the nervous system. Implementing mental boundaries around money worries prevents anxious rumination from bleeding into daily life and work quality. True inner peace is not a reward earned after becoming rich. It is the fundamental starting point. Chapter 9, Money Loves Movement, Not Fear. Have you ever watched someone hover over their online banking app like it's a dormant volcano about to erupt, terrified that transferring money to a savings account or paying off a debt will somehow trigger an instant financial earthquake? We have to laugh at the strange, superstitious rituals we build around money. We treat our bank accounts like ancient relics in a temple that must never be touched, moved, or altered, convinced that any motion will anger the financial gods and leave us stranded in ruin. Scarcity thinking tells us that the safest place for money is completely paralyzed. It whispers that you must clutch every dollar tightly to your chest, hide it under the mattress of your comfort zone, and never let it circulate because the outside world is a hostile wasteland waiting to rob you. Behavioral economists and financial philosophers, however, point to a fundamental universal law: money is a currency. And the root word of currency is current. It is meant to flow, circulate, and move. Think about what happens to water when it stops moving. A rushing river teems with life, clarity, and motion. But a pool of water that has no outlet, no movement, and no circulation quickly stagnates, turns murky, and becomes toxic. Money operates on the exact same energetic and practical principles. Consider the story of a meticulous store owner named Roland. Roland was exceptionally proud of his vintage bookstore. He was equally proud of his massive, untouched cash reserve sitting in a traditional savings account earning practically zero interest. Whenever an opportunity arose to upgrade his store's digital presence, invest in rare inventory, or take a foundational marketing course, Roland would clutch his pearls and refuse to spend a dime. Cash is king, Roland would repeat like a sacred mantra, refusing to let any money leave his sight. Yet, because he refused to invest in motion or adapt to changing reader habits, his bookstore slowly withered. Foot traffic dropped, his inventory grew stale, and his beloved cash reserve was slowly eaten away by inflation and mounting overhead costs. He was guarding a shrinking pile of dust while the rest of the world marched forward. One day, after reading a piece on modern retail adaptation, Roland decided to take a terrifying leap of faith. Instead of hoarding every dollar, he took a calculated portion of his stagnant savings and invested it into a streamlined online storefront, professional branding, and community author events. The first month, looking at his slightly lower bank balance felt like a physical gut punch. His scarcity alarm bells wailed. But within 90 days, the digital reach brought in customers from 3 different continents, and local book clubs packed his shop every weekend. His money had moved, and in return, it brought back exponential growth. Roland laughed at his past self, realizing that his obsession with static security had almost driven him out of business. Nothing illustrates our fear of financial movement quite like how we approach debt and obligations. When we are stuck in survival thinking, paying bills or clearing debts feels like a brutal amputation. Every time we send money out into the world to pay for rent, utilities, or services rendered, we feel a sharp sting of loss, as if someone is picking our pockets. An abundance mindset completely flips that narrative on its head. Imagine changing the internal dialogue from, "I hate paying bills, everyone is taking my money," to, "I am deeply grateful for the electricity that lights my home, the roof over my head, and the services that make my life possible. This money is my vote of appreciation flowing back into the world." That sounds deceptively simple, but it rewires your emotional relationship with transactions. When you send money out with resentment, fear, and scarcity, you are energetically broadcasting a signal of lack. You are telling the universe that money leaves you with pain. But when you send money out with gratitude, confidence, and the clear knowledge that value is constantly circulating back to you, the entire dynamic shifts. Money loves movement, but it requires direction. It doesn't respond well to reckless impulse spending, nor does it thrive in paralyzed stagnation. It flows best when it is deployed with clarity, purpose, and trust. When you stop treating every dollar leaving your hand as a tragedy and start treating your financial life as an active, thriving ecosystem, the fear evaporates. You realize that you don't need to hoard money out of panic because you trust your own ongoing capacity to generate value, solve problems, and attract opportunity. The river keeps flowing, and as long as you keep it moving, you will never run dry. Chapter Summary. Scarcity thinking treats money like an untouchable relic, fostering stagnation and fear of financial motion. The root of currency is current. Money, like water, requires circulation and movement to remain healthy and productive. Hoarding cash out of defensive panic often leads to business decay and lost relevance in a changing marketplace. Shifting financial transactions from a painful sense of loss to an appreciative exchange rewires the nervous system for abundance. Viewing money as a thriving ecosystem ensures that deploying capital with purpose. Chapter 10, Generosity, Gratitude, and the Psychology of Receiving. Have you ever watched someone receive a compliment or a generous gift, and instead of simply smiling and saying thank you, they immediately launch into a frantic, defensive monologue about how they don't deserve it, how it was really no trouble, and how they must somehow repay it before the sun sets? We have to laugh at ourselves, because nothing highlights our internal wiring quite like our absolute awkwardness when it comes to receiving. We love to talk about the virtue of giving. After all, giving makes us feel noble, in control, and morally secure. But receiving? Receiving makes us squirm. It triggers a secret, deeply embedded fear that we are now somehow in debt, that we owe a cosmic favor, or that we aren't truly worthy of the grace being handed to us. Scarcity thinking operates on a strict zero-sum ledger. It whispers that if someone else wins, you must have lost. If someone gives to you, it means you are now in a position of weakness or dependency. And when it comes to generosity, scarcity treats generosity like financial suicide. It tells you that you can only afford to be generous when you have millions of dollars stacked in a vault, completely ignoring the psychological reality that generosity is not a function of your bank balance. It is a function of your mindset. Consider the story of a hard-working community organizer named Matteo. Matteo worked long hours for a modest nonprofit, constantly stressing over his own bills. Yet, whenever a colleague was going through a rough patch, Matteo would quietly slip a warm homemade meal onto their desk or spend his Saturday helping them move apartments. He gave freely of his time and his small resources because, despite his tight budget, his heart operated from a place of deep abundance. One day, a wealthy local business owner noticed Matteo's relentless dedication and community impact. Impressed by his integrity, the business owner offered Matteo a major corporate partnership with a generous budget and a salary that instantly doubled his income. When Matteo sat down to review the contract, a wave of intense physical discomfort washed over him. His internal scarcity alarm bells went wild. This is too much, his mind screamed. I didn't earn this. What if they find out I'm just an ordinary guy? What if they take it back? Matteo caught himself right on the edge of self-sabotage. He realized that for all his willingness to give to others, he had spent his entire life keeping a tight, defensive lid on what he was willing to receive. Nothing illustrates this paradox quite like the classic holiday dinner comedy where two relatives physically wrestle over who is going to pay the restaurant bill, practically tearing the leather folder in half while hissing at each other through tight, polite smiles. No, I insist. You paid last time. Absolutely not, I won't hear of it. We laugh because we've all been actors in that awkward theater of financial pride. We turn a simple act of shared appreciation into a wrestling match, all because deep down, we are terrified of feeling indebted or vulnerable. True abundance requires mastering both sides of the energetic coin, giving without resentment and receiving without guilt. When you operate from scarcity, your generosity is often conditional and anxious. You give while secretly keeping score, waiting for the other person to pay you back in exact emotional or financial currency. And when you receive, you feel a heavy anchor of obligation drag you down. An abundance mindset changes the entire chemistry of exchange. When you give from abundance, it flows out of you effortlessly, like breath leaving the lungs, knowing that life is a continuous cycle of replenishment. You give because it feels good to add value to the world, expecting nothing in return. And when you receive, whether it is a compliment, a lucrative opportunity, an unexpected gift, or a financial windfall. You learn to take a deep breath, open your hands, and say simply, "Thank you." You stop treating abundance like a limited pie where accepting a slice means depriving someone else. You realize that when you gracefully receive support, wealth, or kindness, you are actually validating the giver's desire to express generosity. You are completing the circuit. Gratitude acts as the emotional amplifier for this entire process. When you walk through your day noticing the small, quiet abundance already present, a good cup of coffee, a supportive friend, a clean workspace, an inspiring idea, your brain shifts out of threat detection mode. It stops scanning for what is missing and starts celebrating what is present. And neuroscientifically speaking, a brain that is actively scanning for gratitude and open to receiving is primed to notice high-value opportunities that a stressed, defensive brain completely edits out. You do not need to wait until you are a millionaire to cultivate the psychology of a prosperous person. You can practice it right now, today, by simply allowing yourself to receive a kind gesture with a full heart, and by giving your gifts to the world without gripping your fists in fear. When giving and receiving become a seamless, joyful dance rather than a defensive tug-of-war, money flows into your life with a quiet, natural grace. Chapter Summary. Scarcity thinking makes giving feel like a dangerous loss and receiving feel like a dangerous debt or vulnerability. True generosity is a mindset of abundance rather than a byproduct of a massive bank balance. Financial awkwardness during bill paying or gift exchanging often masks a deep subconscious discomfort with accepting support. Receiving gracefully completes the energetic circuit of prosperity and validates the giver's desire to share value. Gratitude and openness shift the brain out of survival panic, priming it to recognize. Chapter 11, Opportunities become visible to an abundant mind. Have you ever watched someone frantically search every room in the house for their car keys, tearing couch cushions apart, ripping open drawers, and muttering curses under their breath, only to realize with sheepish embarrassment that the keys were sitting right there in their hand the entire time? We have to laugh at our own frantic moments, because nothing illustrates human tunnel vision quite like panic. When we are stressed, rushed, or desperate, our brains undergo a biological narrowing process. We can look directly at a solution, an opening, or a golden opportunity, and our stressed-out visual and cognitive systems will completely edit it out of existence. Scarcity thinking is the ultimate psychological form of misplacing your keys while holding them in your hand. When you operate from chronic financial stress, your mind is locked into survival mode. Your amygdala is screaming fire, your stress hormones are flooding your system, and your brain's primary directive is immediate threat mitigation. In that state, you aren't looking for growth, you are looking for shelter. Behavioral economists and neuroscientists call this cognitive bandwidth taxation. When every ounce of your mental energy is consumed by figuring out how to bridge the gap between this week's expenses and your dwindling account balance, you literally lack the spare processing power to notice long-term leverage. You walk right past doors marked "Opportunity" because your eyes are glued to the floor, watching out for tripwires. Consider the story of a talented independent carpenter named Liam. Liam was a master craftsman whose woodwork looked like fine sculpture. Yet, his bank account was perpetually gasping for air. Why? Because Liam spent every waking hour frantically bidding on low-paying, grueling residential repair gigs just to cover the next batch of material costs. Whenever a local boutique hotel designer offered him a long-term commercial partnership that required upfront design work and patience, Liam would panic and turn it down. "I don't have time for grand visions," he would snap, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I need cash today to pay for tomorrow's lumber." He was trapped on a hamster wheel of his own exhaustion, running faster and faster while staying in the exact same financial spot. One afternoon, completely burned out with a wrenched back, Liam was forced to take a mandatory 3-day pause. Sitting on his front porch with an ice pack and a cup of coffee, unable to swing a hammer, his frantic mental noise finally began to quiet down. While resting, he casually picked up a design magazine left on his porch by a neighbor. As he flipped through the pages, his slowed down, relaxed brain finally noticed something he had been blind to for years. High-end interior designers in his city were desperately searching for custom, sustainable local wood installations, and paying staggering sums for them. The opportunity hadn't just appeared out of thin air. It had been running ads in local circles for 2 years. Liam had simply been too busy surviving to see it. He didn't return to the grueling repair gigs. Instead, he used his enforced rest to craft a portfolio aimed directly at boutique designers. Within 6 months, 2 high-end contracts completely transformed his business, tripling his income while cutting his physical labor in half. Liam laughed at the cosmic irony. Abundance wasn't hiding from him, he had been hiding from abundance behind a wall of frantic busyness. Nothing illustrates this mental blind spot quite like the classic comedy of walking past a cash machine or a networking event while muttering about how nobody ever helps you out, completely ignoring the fact that you refused eye contact with everyone in the room because you were wearing an armor of stress. When you shift from survival thinking to abundance thinking, your cognitive radar system undergoes a massive upgrade. An abundant mind is a curious, expansive mind. Instead of scanning for threats, lack, and dead ends, your prefrontal cortex starts scanning for collaboration, leverage, and creative solutions. You stop seeing the economy as a closed room where every dollar someone else makes is stolen directly from your pocket, and start seeing it as an open marketplace of infinite value exchange. Opportunities do not magically materialize the moment you change your mindset. What changes is you. Your perceptual filter clears. You start noticing the book recommendation that points you toward a new career path. You start hearing the offhand comment from a colleague that sparks a profitable business idea. You start recognizing that the resources you need are often much closer than you realized. When you stop letting panic steer your perception, the world transforms from a menacing obstacle course into a vast, welcoming landscape of possibility. You realize that you don't have to claw and fight for every single crumb, because the table is infinitely large, and your capacity to create value is entirely unlimited. Chapter Summary. Chronic stress and scarcity trigger cognitive narrowing, literally blinding the brain to surrounding opportunities and solutions. Desperate, survival hustling often forces people to reject high-leverage opportunities out of short-term panic. Frantic busyness acts as a perceptual block, masking profitable avenues that have been sitting right in plain sight. Shifting to an abundance mindset upgrades your cognitive filter, turning your awareness from threat detection to creative problem solving. Abundance reveals that the marketplace is an expansive ecosystem of value exchange rather than. Chapter 12, Creating Wealth Without Losing Yourself. Have you ever watched someone climb the corporate or entrepreneurial ladder with relentless, single-minded intensity, sacrificing their health, their relationships, and their sanity to reach the summit, only to finally arrive and discover that the mountaintop is completely empty? We have to laugh at the tragic comedy of our modern hustle culture. We spend our youth trading our health for wealth, and then spend our later years desperately trading our accumulated wealth to buy back a fraction of our health. It is the ultimate human shell game. Scarcity thinking whispers a dangerous lie: you can have peace, or you can have prosperity, but you cannot have both. It tells you that if you want to build real wealth, you have to become a relentless machine. You have to grind 24 hours a day, crush your competitors, ignore your family dinners, and treat your physical body like an annoying biological inconvenience that occasionally requires coffee and sleep. This is the myth of hollow victory. True abundance is not just a numbers game played on a spreadsheet. Wealth that requires you to sacrifice your soul, your character, your peace of mind, or the people you love isn't wealth at all, it is an expensive form of bondage. Consider the story of a brilliant financial analyst named Victor. Victor was an absolute star at his firm. He worked 80-hour weeks, devoured complex market trends, and watched his net worth climb steadily year after year. By all external metrics, Victor was a roaring success. Yet, behind closed doors, Victor's life was an absolute wasteland. He hadn't spoken to his brother in 3 years over a petty argument. His marriage was hanging by a thread because his wife felt like a roommate sharing space with a glowing laptop screen. And Victor himself was a walking ball of tension headaches, surviving on espresso and pure willpower, waking up every morning with a hollow ache in his chest. One evening, while working late at his empty office, Victor suffered a minor panic attack that landed him in urgent care. Sitting on the hospital gurney, staring at the sterile ceiling tiles while the nurse monitored his racing heart, a terrifying thought hit him: if I dropped dead right now, my firm would post my job opening before my obituary even hit the paper. All those years of grinding, all those accumulated numbers in his bank account, and he had nothing to show for it except a ruined body and a lonely apartment. Victor realized something profound. He had been building his financial fortress, but he had locked himself inside as a prisoner. Nothing illustrates this misplaced hustle quite like the classic comedy of buying expensive wellness retreats, meditation apps, and luxury vacation packages to cure the stress caused by working 80 hours a week to afford them. We try to medicate our burnout with luxury items, completely missing the fact that the poison was the pace itself. Creating wealth without losing yourself requires a complete redefinition of ROI, return on investment. When scarcity drives your career, your only metric of success is the bottom-line dollar figure. When abundance guides your path, you measure your wealth across a much wider, richer spectrum. The quality of your daily peace. The depth of your relationships. The vitality of your physical health. The creative joy you bring to your work. You realize that sustainable wealth is built like a deep-rooted tree, not a flimsy tent. A tree doesn't rush its growth by tearing its roots out of the soil every night to check if they are growing faster. It establishes a strong, stable foundation, drinks deeply from its environment, and expands steadily over time. When you shift from survival thinking to abundant creation, you stop viewing boundaries as weaknesses. You realize that taking an evening walk, spending uninterrupted time with your children, or getting 8 hours of sleep isn't wasting time, it is protecting the very instrument that generates your value. An abundant mind understands that you do not need to exploit yourself or others to prosper. True prosperity is regenerative. It creates value that uplifts your clients, honors your partners, enriches your community, and leaves you with enough energy at the end of the day to actually enjoy the life you are building. You stop treating your work as a frantic escape from the fear of poverty and start treating it as a joyful expression of your unique talents. And when money arrives, as it inevitably does when aligned with integrity and purpose, it feels like a natural reward rather than blood money earned through sacrifice. You can have success without selling your soul. In fact, you will find that when you stop losing yourself in the frantic scramble of scarcity, your creative power triples, your stress vanishes, and the wealth you build finally feels like home. Chapter Summary. Scarcity thinking falsely teaches that you must sacrifice your health, relationships, and peace of mind to achieve prosperity. The hollow victory of workaholism leaves people wealthy in numbers but bankrupt in vitality and genuine connection. Using luxury purchases to medicate burnout caused by frantic overworking is a classic symptom of misaligned priorities. Sustainable wealth requires expanding your definition of ROI to include health, relationships, and daily peace of mind. Abundant creation treats work as a regenerative expression of talent rather than a frantic escape from the fear of poverty. Chapter 13, Thinking Like the Future Version of You. Have you ever watched someone carefully pack for a vacation to a tropical beach resort, yet insist on wearing a heavy winter parka, lugging around snow boots, and carrying a heavy woolen blanket through the airport terminal just in case a sudden blizzard hits downtown Honolulu? We have to laugh at the sheer absurdity of preparing for a reality we are actively trying to leave behind. Yet, most of us run our financial lives the exact same way. We say we want financial freedom, abundance, and peace of mind, but we continue to pack our mental suitcases with the heavy winter garments of past survival, old panic, and outdated scarcity habits. You cannot step into a future of prosperity while wearing the heavy emotional armor of your past poverty. Behavioral psychologists point out that human beings are notoriously bad at imagining our future selves. To our brains, the future version of us feels almost like a stranger. When we make financial decisions today, our neural activity actually resembles the brain activity we experience when thinking about a completely different person. That is why it is so easy to sabotage our future self for a 5-minute dopamine hit today. We are essentially stealing from a stranger. Scarcity thinking keeps you permanently anchored in yesterday's emergency room. Every financial choice you make is a defensive reaction to a crisis that happened 5 years ago. If you grew up watching your parents stress over sudden job losses, your brain keeps you locked in a permanent state of economic post-traumatic stress disorder, treating every minor bank fluctuation like an impending shipwreck. Consider the story of a talented independent graphic designer named Jonah. Jonah had successfully built a thriving digital agency, tripling his income over 3 years. Yet, his daily life hadn't changed at all. He still woke up every morning in a cold sweat, checking his bank account 3 times before brushing his teeth, terrified that everything was about to vanish. He refused to take weekends off, lived like a monk, and treated every client invoice like it was his last. When a business mentor asked Jonah why he was running himself ragged when his accounts were healthier than ever, Jonah froze. He realized a startling truth. He was still running his business as if he were an 18-year-old college dropout sleeping on a park bench. His external reality had evolved into abundance, but his internal identity was still trapped in the survival ward. Nothing illustrates this temporal disconnect quite like the comedy of upgrading your car or home, yet still hoarding broken rubber bands, plastic takeout containers, and expired coupons in your kitchen drawers, just in case the world ends. We love our safety nets, even when those nets are made of rotting twine. Shifting from survival to abundance requires a radical shift in your temporal perspective. You have to learn to consult your future self before making major decisions. Imagine taking a deep breath before clicking "Buy now" on an impulse purchase or before panicking over a delayed client payment, and asking a simple, grounding question. What would the financially wise, completely secure, abundant version of me do in this exact moment? That question acts like a mental time machine. It instantly lifts you out of the primitive, panic-stricken amygdala and drops you right into the prefrontal cortex of your highest potential. The future version of you doesn't panic over routine market dips. The future version of you doesn't hoard every penny out of terror, nor does it blow windfalls on impulsive status symbols. The future version of you invests with clarity, spends with intention, sets healthy boundaries, and treats money as a reliable, renewable tool for creating a meaningful life. When you start making decisions from the perspective of who you are becoming rather than who you used to be, your behavior naturally aligns with your goals. You stop sabotaging your progress because your daily actions finally match your destination. You realize that abundance isn't a magical lottery ticket waiting for you at the end of a rainbow. It is a daily practice of alignment. Every time you make a calm, empowered choice today, you are casting a vote for the future version of you, the one who looks back at this exact moment and smiles, grateful that you finally had the courage to drop the heavy winter parka and step out into the warm, open sunlight. Chapter Summary. Scarcity thinking keeps people reacting to past financial trauma rather than designing future prosperity. Human brains naturally treat the future self like a stranger, making it easy to sabotage long-term stability for short-term relief. External financial success often fails to bring peace if internal identity remains trapped in survival mode. Consulting your future self before making financial decisions instantly shifts brain activity from panic to strategic clarity. Abundance is built daily by aligning current choices with the calm. Chapter 14, Living Beyond Scarcity Forever. Have you ever watched someone meticulously pack for a camping trip, bringing 3 different flashlights, a portable generator, extra batteries, survival rations for a small army, and a heavy-duty machete, only to spend the entire weekend staying at a luxury resort right next door to a fully stocked grocery store? We have to laugh at the comedy of our own overprepared anxieties. We spend our lives arming ourselves against imaginary disasters, building fortress walls around our bank accounts, and living in a perpetual state of siege, completely unaware that the war ended a long time ago. Scarcity thinking is the ultimate ghost war. It convinces you that you must remain on high alert forever, that if you drop your guard for even a single second, financial ruin will pounce. Living beyond scarcity doesn't mean bad things will never happen. Life is inherently dynamic, unpredictable, and filled with seasons of economic shift. Cars break down, markets fluctuate, and unexpected expenses occasionally knock on the door. The difference between survival thinking and abundance thinking is not whether challenges occur, it is how your nervous system responds when they do. When you live from scarcity, every unexpected bill is a catastrophe. It confirms your deepest fear: I am not safe. When you live from abundance, an unexpected bill is simply an operational task. It is a puzzle to be solved, a logistics item to be handled with calm competence. You look at your resources, you adjust your strategy, you handle it, and you move on without letting it contaminate your entire emotional state. Consider the story of a seasoned freelance editor named Marcus. For decades, Marcus lived on a financial knife edge. Every time a client contract ended, his stomach would tie itself into knots. He hoarded his workspace, worked through crippling fevers, and terrified himself with nightly mental loops about homelessness. One year, right before the holiday season, 2 major clients dropped their contracts simultaneously due to corporate restructuring. Under his old operating system, Marcus would have spiraled into total panic. Instead, something remarkable happened. Because he had spent months rewiring his internal narrative toward abundance and resourcefulness, his brain didn't sound the air raid sirens. He paused, took a deep breath, and thought, I have built a marketable skill set, I have a strong portfolio, and I know how to solve problems. Let's see what else is possible. Within 2 weeks of calm, focused outreach, Marcus landed 3 boutique publishing contracts that paid significantly better than the clients he had lost. Looking back, the sudden contract loss wasn't a catastrophe at all, it was the catalyst that forced him to upgrade his entire business model. Nothing illustrates the shift to permanent freedom quite like the comedy of people who finally achieve financial stability, yet continue to clip grocery coupons with the intensity of a military strategist, agonizing over every nickel as if the bailiff is standing outside their door. Breaking free from scarcity forever means forgiving your past self. It means recognizing that every anxious habit, every dollar-hoarding reflex, and every sleepless night you endured was your nervous system trying to protect you the only way it knew how. You don't need to shame yourself for having been afraid. You simply need to thank your survival instincts for keeping you alive this far, and then gently relieve them of duty. When you cross the threshold into permanent abundance, your relationship with money undergoes its final, beautiful metamorphosis. Money ceases to be a weapon used to measure your worth, a shield used to block out vulnerability, or a scoreboard used to prove your superiority. It becomes what it was always meant to be, a quiet, reliable tool for living a generous, creative, and purposeful life. You wake up knowing that your security is not anchored to a fragile number in a digital database, but to your unshakable resourcefulness, your clarity of mind, and your connection to the infinite flow of human value. You stop running from poverty and start walking toward possibility. And in that quiet, grounded space, the struggle finally ends. Chapter Summary. Living beyond scarcity does not mean life is free of challenges, it means your emotional response to challenges shifts from panic to calm competence. Treating unexpected expenses as routine operational tasks rather than catastrophic emergencies prevents unnecessary emotional suffering. Forgiving your past survival instincts and thanking them for protection is essential for letting go of old, anxious habits. Permanent abundance transforms money from a weapon or a scoreboard into a reliable tool for creative, purposeful living. True security is anchored in personal resourcefulness and inner clarity rather than a fragile number in a bank. Chapter 15, When Abundance Becomes Your Natural State. Have you ever watched someone step out of an air-conditioned building on a scorching midsummer afternoon, squint against the glare, and instinctively brace themselves for a wall of suffocating heat, only to realize that a refreshing, cool breeze is gently sweeping through the courtyard? We have to laugh at our conditioned reflexes. We spend so much of our lives bracing for impact, anticipating the next financial crisis, guarding our resources, and expecting life to be an uphill battle, that when actual ease finally arrives, we almost don't know how to stand upright in it. We keep looking for the catch. We keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, convinced that peace is just a temporary intermission between catastrophes. Scarcity teaches you to treat peace like a suspicious anomaly. Abundance teaches you that peace is your natural state of being. Think about it. In a world obsessed with hustle, frantic striving, and endless accumulation, true wealth has become radical. But the most profound realization of this entire journey is that abundance was never something you had to chase, beg, or trick the universe into giving you. It was something you had to clear the internal debris to receive. Consider the story of a retired artisan named Clara. For over 40 years, Clara ran a modest pottery studio. Through economic recessions, changing trends, and personal heartbreaks, Clara's hands never stopped shaping clay. Yet, for the first 30 years of her career, she operated from a frantic place of survival. She priced her work too low, feared every empty month, and viewed her fellow artists as fierce competitors fighting over scraps of gallery space. Then, in her later years, something shifted. Tired of the constant internal friction, Clara made a conscious, radical decision to let go of the struggle. She stopped competing, stopped worrying about market trends, and simply focused on creating pieces that brought her absolute joy, pricing them fairly to reflect the deep soul she poured into her craft. Her income didn't plummet, it tripled. Why? Because collectors could feel the difference. Her work was no longer infused with the frantic desperation of someone trying to pay rent. It was infused with the calm, grounded mastery of someone anchored in abundance. When people visited her studio, they weren't just buying a ceramic bowl or a vase. They were buying a piece of that calm, grounded energy. Nothing illustrates the beauty of this final state quite like the comedy of people who spend decades stressing over their retirement portfolios, only to realize in their first week of genuine relaxation that the best things in life. A deep conversation, a quiet morning walk, the rich laughter of good friends, cost virtually nothing at all. We spend our whole lives running toward a finish line of wealth, only to discover that the finish line was just permission to finally enjoy the present moment. When abundance becomes your natural state, your relationship with money is entirely transformed. You no longer view wealth as a finite pie where someone else's success steals from your portion. You see it as an ever-expanding garden of human creativity and mutual exchange. You no longer look at your bank account as a report card on your personal worth. You see it as a helpful dashboard for your current operations. You no longer make decisions out of fear, lack, or panic. You make decisions out of clarity, generosity, and vision. You wake up in the morning without the heavy, invisible anchor of financial anxiety pressing down on your chest. You sip your coffee and look out at the day not as a gauntlet to be survived, but as a canvas of infinite possibility. You know that no matter what economic shifts occur in the world outside, your true wealth lives inside your resourcefulness, your resilience, and your unshakable peace of mind. This is the ultimate promise of shifting from survival to abundance. Money stops being the quiet narrator of your fears and becomes what it was always intended to be. A faithful, reliable tool for building a life of purpose, freedom, and profound joy. You have stepped out of the fog of scarcity. You have dropped the heavy winter parka of past trauma. You have learned to let money flow through your life with grace, intention, and gratitude. The struggle is over. Welcome to your natural state of abundance. Chapter Summary. Scarcity conditions people to view peace as a temporary anomaly, while abundance recognizes peace as the natural human state. True wealth is not something to chase or trick the universe into providing, but a natural state uncovered by clearing internal debris. Infusing your work and creations with calm mastery rather than frantic desperation naturally attracts higher value and appreciation. When abundance is your natural state, money transforms from a scoreboard of worth into a reliable tool for purposeful living. Security is permanently anchored in personal resourcefulness and inner clarity, freeing you from financial anxiety forever.